The PBO reports that this Prime Minister panicked, overpaid a Texas oil company by $1 billion.
Tonight, overpriced and overpaid, the government comes under fire again for its purchase of a decades-old pipeline.
They recognize that, hey, that guy is no different than I am. You know, if he can achieve something like that, why can't I?
And NASA's first Indigenous astronaut inspires youth to reach for the stars. Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. Canada's Parliamentary Budget Office says the federal government wasn't gouged but didn't get a great deal either when they bought the Kinder Morgan pipeline for $4.4 billion. The PBO says the line is worth between $3.6 and $4.6 billion. Meanwhile, the cost of tripling the line's capacity to ship bitumen from Alberta to the BC coast rises to $9 billion if work is completed before 2022, and that's if nothing goes wrong. Several Indian Act band councils along the route support the line, but band members and environmental groups still want it quashed. And the Trans Mountain expansion made for some lively discussion in question period today.
Member for Skeena, Bulkley Valley.
A good price. The Liberals keep telling us how the environment and the economy must go hand in hand, but on the Trans Mountain disaster, the Liberals on the one hand are hammering the environment, and on the other hand are hammering our finances. Yep. The PBO reports that this Prime Minister panicked, overpaid a Texas oil company by $1 billion, and it's now costing Canadians an extra $700 million every year because of the Liberals' flawed environmental assessment was tossed out of court. Well, the Liberals just stop this nightmare, stop throwing good money after bad, and finally start investing in the green economy like they actually promised Canadians they would.
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
The member is wrong. What the Parliamentary Budget Officer said was that, in fact, the purchase of the pipeline is positive for the economy. We want to make sure that those benefits accrue to all Canadians. What they also said was that there was, from their analysis, a range of potential purchase prices, and in fact our purchase price was right in the middle of their range. So clearly not only a good commercial purchase, but one that's going to be very positive for our economy. We believe that getting our resources to international markets so that 99% of our resources don't go to the United States is the right decision for Canada and for Canadians.
Honourable Member for Skeena, Bulkley Valley. Order.
To see this guy at an auction, he'd just keep bidding against himself. They paid $4.5 billion for a 65-year-old pipeline. $700 million more lost every year because of their own failed review of, and these clients want to go out and spend another $15 billion building more pipelines than they don't even have a permit. What could possibly go wrong, Mr. Speaker? It's like the Prime Minister went out to buy a house, overpaid for it, didn't insist on a home inspection, and now the roof is leaking. They panicked, they got fleeced by a Texas oil company, and now we're on the hook for their failure. How many boil water advisories could be lifted? How many green jobs could be created? When are these guys...
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
I think we should just start with the fact that the member is incorrect. He actually didn't apparently read the report. What we know, though, most importantly, is that we see that it's important for us to have the capacity to get our oil resources to international markets. We are dependent on, right now, sending 99% of our resources to U.S. markets, and if there was ever a time where Canadians believe that it's important to diversify, now is that time. So this purchase is going to be good for the long-term health for our economy. It's obviously going to be good for our oil sector, and we believe that both those things are quite important.
A ruling from Canada's Supreme Court today says the trustee for a bankrupt Alberta energy company can't just walk away from unprofitable wells on farmland without cleaning them up. The Alberta Court of Queen's Bench had allowed a bankrupt energy company to write off unprofitable and unreclaimed wells as bad debts when its assets were sold to creditors. The province of Alberta says the decision gives them more clout to force energy companies to clean up so-called orphan wells. Meanwhile, an Indigenous business association in Alberta is planning a pro-pipeline rally February 10th in Lac-La Biche. in support of the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the oil and gas industry as a whole. Under the Rally for Resources banner, the Region 1 Aboriginal Business Association is hoping to see more than 1,000 people come together to show their support for the pipeline. They say they are not affiliated with the Yellow Vest movement, who have held similar rallies. This rally will see a convoy of tractor trailers and service vehicles drive a 50-kilometer route from Lac La Biche to the hamlet of Plamondon and back.
You hear about maybe 3 or 4%, I don't know what the exact number is, of Aboriginal entities, Indigenous entities that are against the pipeline, but you never hear of the ones that are for it. And we believe that there's much more that are for it, but just are kind of same as us, sitting back and kind of quiet about it. We figured we'd do something to kind of make that known, that there is an association, a business association out there, Aboriginal entity that is pro-pipeline, and we fully depend on the oil and gas industry to put the bread and butter on our table.
Time for a quick break, but coming up, we'll meet a woman in Rankin Inlet who makes homemade parkas. And before we head to break, here's a look at what's coming up after the news.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamarand, and here's what's coming up on Nation to Nation. The House has resumed sitting this week after a holiday break. Our political panel of MPs debates resource development and pipelines, as this will be the last session before the next federal election. As well as the Framework Agreement initiative really been put on hold. It promises to restrict Ottawa from infringing on Indigenous rights in the future, but the government has made a bunch of announcements recently that sound like it's being implemented piece by piece. It's all coming up after the national news.
Here's a look at Friday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. -6 and snow for Halifax, sunny and -9 in Fredericton, -20 for Happy Valley Goose Bay, 23 below in Nain. Sunny and 12 for Montreal, -20 and snow in Chibougamau, -13 for London and Sarnia, -13 in Sault Ste. Marie. 15 below with snow for Thunder Bay, snow and -19 in Sioux Lookout. -27 for Puckatawagan, 22 below with snow for God's Lake. -15 in Winnipeg and Gimli, Dauphin as well, 13 below for Brandon. -7 in Swift Current and Estevan, -18 for North Battleford. -21 in Meadow Lake, 23 below in La Ronge. Welcome back. Clayton Boucher is a Métis man we've told you about before. He was wrongfully convicted for drug possession, and his wife died while he was in jail. APTN producer Kenneth Jackson has new information that sheds more light on what happened. It's all part of his recent expose on our website. Kenneth joins us now from our Ottawa bureau. Kenneth, good to see you. Can you remind our viewers what happened to Clayton Boucher?
Clayton Boucher was wrongfully convicted of drug possession on May 31st, 2017 in Lac La Biche, Alberta. It's about 200 kilometers north of Edmonton. Those charges were overturned a few months later by the Alberta Court of Appeal, but it did so even though Clayton had pleaded guilty. That's because there was no drugs, ever. And that's something Clayton had always maintained, but the Crown offered him time served if he pleaded guilty, so he took the deal. By that time, he had been in jail for about 4 months. He also just lost his common-law wife in a car collision and was a broken man. But there was something he didn't know, and that was that on the RCMP had tested powder found in his apartment. It suspected was cocaine. Those tests came back on negative March 20th. It was just baking soda. That's 40 days, and that was 40 days before his wife died. Only no one told him, or apparently his lawyer. In fact, the RCMP didn't tell the Crown until several days after she died. The Crown says he misunderstood. The Crown says he misunderstood like his own exhibit list and what was tested. Apparently, he thought there was other powder that wasn't tested, but I've seen all the evidence that doesn't make sense. However, Clayton's lawyer at the time says he was. He supported that on the plea deal because he was told by the Crown that tests came back saying there were traces of cocaine found. Either way, there was never any drugs, and Clayton got vindicated later on.
Now, Kenneth, you've discovered some new information here. What can you tell us about that?
Well, what I just explained is something I previously reported on. APTN's been, APTN was the first to break this story and stay on it. Now I can tell you more of it. I had a cop source call me one day and ask, why didn't Clayton just go for bail when he was arrested on drug charges? Well, there was a reason for that, and it just wrapped up earlier this month. When Clayton was arrested January 22nd, 2017 for drug offenses, he was already on bail for an alleged armed robbery in October 2015. Well, that armed robbery charge was stayed by the Crown just 2 weeks ago. It was alleged that Boucher robbed a department store in Lac La Biche for $160. There was no working security camera, so the entire case relied on 2 female clerks working that day. We uncovered their evidence was full of holes. Despite finding a photo of Clayton on Facebook and believing he was a robber, one clerk still couldn't pick Clayton out of a photo lineup with the RCMP. The other clerk picked him out of the lineup, but needed to be asked several questions by the RCMP before she was certain, and she needed to be 100% certain. Also, her memory had just improved. She didn't recall the robber having any facial hair on the day of the robbery, but now 17 days later, at the RCMP detachment, the robber had a thick mustache, just like Boucher did or Clayton had in the just like Clayton had in the Facebook photo they had found online. There's also several other issues that we explained in the story online that I broke just recently this week. But the Crown stayed the armed robbery charge because the RCMP never subpoenaed the 2 witnesses to testify. The Crown had no case the day of the trial was supposed to begin.
So, Kenneth, anyone taking responsibility for all this?
Not really responsibility. So what Clayton did was he sued the Mounties, the Crown, and the former lawyer. He sued the Mounties, the Crown, and his former lawyer last spring with the help of a Toronto law firm led by prominent lawyer John Phillips. He's seeking over $1 million, but also answers. He wants to know who knew what and when. We already know the RCMP disciplined one officer, Corporal Dan Fenton, for neglect of duty. He was supposed to be in charge of the drug test. Essentially, they sent the test on this powder off to Health Canada. It gets tested to be a controlled substance, and it comes back as an exhibit. That was Fenton's job. His job was to take the test back and then give them to the lead officer that was investigating. He didn't do that. The RCMP seems to be scratching it off as a big mistake, but Clayton accuses them. Clayton says, "No, you did it on purpose," and he's saying that they did it because he's Métis and for other reasons. Another interesting part of this is the RCMP denied in court any wrongdoing, but 10 days prior disciplined Fenton. So what gives? Either you did something wrong or you didn't. The RCMP also say, hey, we told the Crown that the powder wasn't drugs like a month before Boucher pleaded guilty, so it's not really our fault, right? But, again, that's something that's working through the court. Another thing I found interesting, though, is that the lawyer from Justice Canada is representing the Crown attorney, which is Erwin Schultz, and the 5 Mounties that are being sued, even though they're at odds, one saying one did the other. It's a case that's still working its way through the court that we'll cover, but we'll have to wait and see how it goes. But before that, I hope to have another story out soon, and that's about the Crown, Erwin Schultz, and about the Crown and what the Alberta Law Society's response was to what he did.
Well, Kenneth, looking forward to those stories and your continued coverage on this. Appreciate you taking some time for us.
Right on. Thanks, Dennis.
A mural depicting the education journey of students at Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School was unveiled in Thunder Bay today. As Willow Fiddler reports, the painting is meant to help students succeed.
If it's going to drop, there we go.
Wow. First Nations artist Ira Johnson unveiled his painting of what getting an education looks like for students here at Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School.
It's a journey that they have to leave at such a young age and from something that they were accustomed to up to that point, right? So when they leave home, they're coming to a new environment and a new society where they're very unfamiliar with a lot of things.
For many students at Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School, their journey begins when they get on a plane to fly hundreds of kilometers from their parents and grandparents.
And it takes a lot of courage for a young person to do that, to leave home to further their education.
Johnson also works in the school's Elders program. He said part of his job is to support the students.
We provide snacks for them throughout the day and moral support, and and always checking up on them and asking them how are you doing today, and that goes a long way,
The school commissioned Johnson to do the 5x7 painting that took him about a year to complete. Student Chief Caleb Mishinen is pleased with how it turned out.
It's amazing. It shows so much passion and emotions for the school. For everybody, it's basically homesick, more sad to see the family watch you leave to come to school and all.
Mishinen said the painting has a good message.
To keep on looking forward and keep your mind straight, like stay out of drugs and just don't act up.
Johnson hopes his art will help the students succeed.
If it inspires them to keep going on their journey to a better, further their education, this is just one stop for them, the Dennis Franklin Cromartie High School.
Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Thunder Bay.
A lot of great art at that school. The sky's the limit. That's the message dozens of youth heard today at a special event in Winnipeg. Astronaut John Harrington shared his experiences as the first Indigenous person to make it to space. Brittany Hobson brings us this story.
When I was 8 years old, I used to sit in a cardboard box and dream I was going to the moon. In the 1960s,
more than 30 years later, John Harrington's dream became a reality. Well, almost. In 2002, Harrington didn't quite make it to the moon, but he arrived at the International Space Station. He's the first Indigenous NASA astronaut to reach space.
I have a chance to go out and share my story with kids that never had a role model in this position. That's not what I set out to do. When I came to NASA and they said, you're the first Indigenous astronaut, I found I had an opportunity to fulfill a role that I take very seriously.
Harrington shared his story with dozens of youth during a conference in Winnipeg. He spent a total of 13 days in space in 2002, where he took his tribe's flag as well as a feather gifted to him by an elder. Harrington is a member of the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma. Growing up, his parents pushed him to pursue a career in aviation. He didn't see many other Indigenous people in the industry. He says that's changing now, but more work needs to be done.
The issue probably is, are there role models in the field of what you want to do? You start looking at the Indigenous community, there are a lot of very successful engineers and scientists and mathematicians and lawyers, do you have an opportunity to interact with those kind of people?
Leilani Henderson attended the conference with a handful of her classmates. And while she dreams of a career in the arts, she says it's inspiring to see Indigenous role models.
It's really cool to see that since I'm Indigenous as well. It's really cool to see someone like part of my culture, like someone I can look up to or my siblings can look up to, so they can know that they could also do things as well.
Harrington left NASA in 2005. In 2007, he rocketed into a new career as a motivational speaker, sharing his story with youth across the continent. Part of that includes nurturing others' dreams.
They recognize that, hey, that guy is no different than I am. If he can achieve something like that, why can't I? What did it take for him to do that, and who helped him do that? So if they can walk away with this feeling of empowerment, that's something they can accomplish, be it this or another career, that's a good thing.
Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
A new study has been released that says the colonization of America by Europeans killed so many Indigenous people it actually affected the Earth's climate. Scientists say around 55 million Indigenous peoples were murdered at the end of the 15th century. That led to abandoned farmland about the size of France being repopulated with vegetation. The study says ice core records shows a drop in atmospheric carbon dioxide around this time, meaning the regrowth pulled enough of the CO2 from the atmosphere to chill the planet. Well, an all-new episode of APTN Investigates debuts on Friday. We've got a sneak peek for you after the break. Here's the rest of Friday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. Minus 22 in snow for Fort McMurray and high level. Minus 7 in Medicine Hat. 5 below with snow in Lethbridge. On the west coast, plus 8 and rain for Vancouver and Victoria. Minus 21 in Fort Nelson. Plus 5 and rain in Prince Rupert. Minus 33 for Old Crow and Mayo. 32 below in Dawson. Minus 20 for Fort Liard, Trout Lake, and Fort Simpson. Minus 28 in Sax Harbor. Minus 29 for Colville Lake. 36 below for Baker Lake at Whale Cove and Cambridge Bay. Minus 32 in Arctic Bay. 37 below in Tallyoak. Welcome back. 70% of all the children in Saskatchewan's child welfare system are Indigenous. It's a staggering statistic. APTN Investigates reporter Kevin Nipatebo traveled to Saskatoon to meet some of the parents caught up in the system. They are working hard to get their kids back. Here's a preview of his episode, Apprehended.
I just wish they come home. I love them and forever in my heart, not my mind.
I just want everyone to know to love your children and hold them close, because the next moment they could be gone. I just want to say that I'm not going to give up on my sons. I'm not going to give up until they come home.
These Saskatchewan parents miss their kids, and they're not alone. According to recent statistics from the provincial government, more than 3,000 kids were in care as of September 2018. 70% of them identified as Indigenous.
I'm seeing my child being removed the same way, same style, and also it's back to the student resident days, and I feel that for her because she's asking, she's looking, and then it really hurts where it counts.
We can't tell you who they are. It's against the law to identify people in the system because it may identify their kids.
You can catch that whole episode tomorrow night on APTN Investigates. That is your APTN National News for this Thursday. You can find a lot more on this busy day over on our website, aptnnews.ca. Stick around. Nation to Nation with Todd Lamarand is up next. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night.